Ladies and gentlemen, today we explore the life of a man who built an empire not through loud proclamations or reckless violence, but through quiet, calculated moves. A name feared in the underworld, yet rarely spoken in public. His influence stretched far and wide, yet he remained in the shadows, letting others take the fall while he reigned in silence. Born in the early 20th century, he arrived in America with nothing but ambition. He understood the rules of the game, loyalty, patience, and the art of staying unnoticed. While others sought power through brute force, he mastered the long game, using alliances and strategy to climb the ranks. He waited, watched, and when the time was right, he took control. The 20th century was a period of rapid change. The United States was a land of opportunity, but it was also a place of hardship for many immigrants arriving with little more than the clothes on their backs. While the American dream promised prosperity to those willing to work hard, the reality was often much harsher. Many found themselves trapped in poverty, struggling to survive in overcrowded neighborhoods with limited opportunities. It was in this environment that organized crime took root. In the early 1900s, major cities like New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia were filled with gangs that operated in the shadows, controlling illegal activities that thrived in the gaps left by the law. These groups ran gambling rings, extorted businesses, and smuggled alcohol during Prohibition. They built secret networks of power, working outside the law to provide services that people, sometimes willingly, sometimes unwillingly, became dependent on. But organized crime wasn't just about violence and lawlessness. It was structured, disciplined, and, in many ways, operated like a business. It had its own rules, hierarchies, and codes of conduct. Loyalty was valued above all else, and betrayal often had deadly consequences. Leaders of these criminal organizations didn't just rely on brute force. They had to be intelligent, strategic, and capable of outthinking both rivals and law enforcement. One of the most significant turning points for organized crime in America was Prohibition, 1920 to 1933, when the government outlawed alcohol. Instead of stopping the trade, this law created a massive underground market, and criminal groups stepped in to supply the demand. Bootlegging became one of the most profitable businesses of the time, making gangsters incredibly wealthy and powerful. Law enforcement agencies struggled to keep up, as these crime syndicates used bribery, intimidation, and careful planning to stay ahead. It was during this period that some of the most notorious figures in organized crime history emerged. They didn't just build criminal enterprises, they built empires that operated like corporations, with strict leadership structures, financial planning, and expansion strategies. Some of these figures became infamous for their violence, making headlines with their bold moves and brutal tactics. Others, however, took a different approach, ruling with subtlety, staying in the background, and letting others take the risks while they reaped the rewards. And that brings us to the man at the center of our discussion today. Unlike the loud and flashy gangsters who sought fame, he built his power quietly, moving like a shadow through the world of crime. He understood the long game, realizing that true power didn't come from making headlines. It came from remaining unseen while controlling everything around him. His rise to the top wasn't an accident. It was the result of patience, intelligence, and a deep understanding of how people worked. He didn't just survive in the dangerous world of organized crime. He mastered it, becoming one of the most powerful figures in the history of the American underworld. And now, let's take a closer look at how he did it. In the world of organized crime, brute force alone is never enough to secure lasting power. Many figures throughout history have risen quickly through acts of violence, only to meet an equally violent end. True power, the kind that endures for decades, requires intelligence, patience, and a deep understanding of human nature. The man we are discussing today was a master strategist, someone who built his empire not through reckless aggression, but through careful planning, patience, and an unmatched ability to outmaneuver his enemies. From the very beginning, he understood that success in the criminal underworld wasn't just about physical strength, it was about the ability to think several steps ahead. He knew when to strike, when to hold back, and, most importantly, when to let others destroy themselves. While many of his contemporaries sought power through bloodshed, he chose a different path, one that relied on building alliances, earning trust, and positioning himself in such a way that power naturally flowed into his hands. Unlike many of his rivals, he wasn't impulsive. He never acted out of emotion, never let pride dictate his decisions. He watched, listened, and learned. He observed the mistakes of others and made sure never to repeat them. He understood that in the criminal world, survival depended on being one step ahead, not just of law enforcement, but also of those within his own organization who might seek to challenge him. One of his greatest strengths was his ability to play the long game. Many gangsters sought immediate gratification, quick money, flashy displays of wealth, and public recognition of their power. But he had a different mindset. He wasn't interested in fame. He was interested in control. And control, he knew, could only be maintained by staying in the shadows and letting others take the risks. He also understood the importance of relationships. While others built their power through fear, he built his through loyalty and respect. He knew how to make people feel indebted to him, how to create a sense of obligation that ensured they would remain loyal. He rarely had to issue threats. His mere presence, his reputation, and his understanding of human psychology were enough to keep people in line. At the same time, he was ruthless when necessary. He knew that in the world he operated in, there was no room for weakness. When someone betrayed him or threatened his position, he dealt with the problem swiftly and efficiently, but always in a way that left no direct ties to him. He never acted out of anger or revenge. Every move he made was calculated, every decision based on logic rather than emotion. His patience was legendary. While others rushed to take power, he waited. He let his rivals exhaust themselves in wars, let them make enemies, let them weaken their own positions. And when the time was right, when the power vacuum was unavoidable, he stepped in, not as a conqueror, but as the natural choice for leadership. This ability to think ahead, to manipulate situations to his advantage, and to control people without them even realizing it made him one of the most formidable figures in organized crime history. His rise to power wasn't the result of luck or brute force. It was the result of careful planning, strategic alliances, and an unmatched ability to see the bigger picture. And once he had power, he never let it slip from his grasp. In the world of organized crime, many figures sought the limelight, basking in their reputation as ruthless, untouchable kings of the underworld. They flaunted their wealth, drove flashy cars, wore expensive suits, and threw extravagant parties. Their names filled newspapers, their exploits became legends, and their criminal empires often crumbled as quickly as they rose. But true power, the kind that lasts, belongs not to those who seek attention, but to those who know how to operate in the shadows. The man we are discussing today was the perfect example of this philosophy. He understood that visibility was a weakness. Unlike his contemporaries, he never sought fame. He never wanted to be the subject of headlines or the target of law enforcement. He knew that the greatest threat to his empire wasn't rival gangs, it was the government, with its ever-growing power to investigate, prosecute, and dismantle criminal organizations. His greatest weapon wasn't fear or violence, it was anonymity. From the earliest days of his career, he avoided the spotlight. While others built reputations as ruthless killers or charismatic gangsters, he built a reputation as a ghost. He rarely spoke in public, rarely left behind a trail, and never engaged in reckless displays of power. If law enforcement came knocking, they often found nothing but whispers of his influence. No direct evidence, no flashy crimes to pin on him. He was always careful, always calculating, ensuring that others took the fall while he remained untouchable. His ability to remain unseen wasn't just about avoiding police attention, it was also about maintaining control. He never needed to shout to be heard. His decisions were final, his authority unquestioned, yet he rarely raised his voice. He didn't need to make threats. His mere presence, his reputation for careful planning and ruthless efficiency, was enough. His associates knew that while he might not speak often, when he did, his words carried absolute weight. Unlike other crime bosses who surrounded themselves with an entourage of bodyguards, he preferred to move discreetly. He lived a modest life compared to his peers, avoiding extravagant mansions and unnecessary luxuries. while his rivals flaunted their wealth, attracting the attention of both the public and the authorities. He remained in the background, letting others assume the role of figurehead while he pulled the strings from behind the curtain. This ability to lead without being seen extended to how he handled conflicts as well. While others resorted to violent outbursts and high-profile assassinations, he understood the power of patience and subtlety. If someone needed to be removed, it was done quietly, efficiently, with no direct connection to him. Rivals disappeared, enemies found themselves imprisoned, and those who betrayed him often met unfortunate ends, but never in ways that pointed back to him. Even within his own organization, he cultivated an air of mystery. Many of those who worked for him never spoke to him directly. Orders were passed down through trusted intermediaries, ensuring that even if someone were caught or turned informant, they could never directly implicate him. This structure made him almost impossible to prosecute. Law enforcement agencies knew he was the real power behind the organization, but proving it was another matter entirely. His leadership style was based on quiet dominance. He ruled not through fear alone, but through respect, trust, and an unshakable reputation for strategic thinking. His associates knew that he was always in control, always several steps ahead of everyone else. Even in the most chaotic moments, when other crime bosses were scrambling to maintain their power, he remained composed, making careful moves that ensured his continued dominance. While others burned brightly and quickly faded, his power endured for decades. Not because he was the loudest, not because he was the most violent, but because he understood the ultimate truth of leadership. Real power is never seen, it is felt. Every great empire, whether legal or illegal, is built on a foundation of strategy, discipline, and control. Some crime lords rely on brute force, ruling with an iron fist, while others use manipulation, alliances, and economic control to maintain power. The man at the center of our discussion today built his empire not through reckless violence but through careful planning, strategic partnerships, and an unmatched ability to stay ahead of both rivals and law enforcement. From humble beginnings, he understood the importance of starting small. He didn't rush to the top. He took his time, learning the inner workings of the criminal underworld. In the early days, he focused on the basics, understanding who held power, who could be trusted, and who would eventually become a liability. He was patient, always calculating, making small but critical moves that positioned him favorably within the organization he would one day control. One of the first key industries he entered was gambling. Illegal gambling was one of the most profitable ventures in the criminal world. Casinos, betting rings, and underground poker games brought in massive sums of money. But gambling wasn't just about revenue. It was about influence. Those who lost money often found themselves in debt, and debt created leverage. He knew how to use this leverage to expand his reach, pulling businessmen, politicians, and even law enforcement officials into his orbit. But gambling was just one piece of the puzzle. He quickly expanded into loan sharking, offering money to those who couldn't get loans through legal means. His terms were simple: if you paid on time, you were fine. If you didn't, there were consequences. Unlike traditional banks, his operations didn't require paperwork, only absolute loyalty and the understanding that debts had to be honored. This system not only brought in enormous profits, but also created a network of people who owed him favors, strengthening his influence far beyond the criminal underworld. As his operations grew, so did his need for structure. He carefully built an organization that functioned with military-like discipline. Everyone had a role and everyone understood the chain of command. Loyalty was rewarded, betrayal was punished swiftly and decisively. Unlike other crime bosses who ruled through paranoia and chaos, he ensured that his organization was built on stability. He didn't tolerate unnecessary violence or reckless behavior. Everything had to be calculated, controlled, and beneficial to the greater structure of his empire. One of his greatest strengths was his ability to keep law enforcement at bay. While other criminals became reckless, drawing attention to themselves, he operated with extreme caution. He avoided flashy public appearances, never left behind a paper trail, and ensured that his name was rarely, if ever, directly connected to illegal activities. He let others take the heat while he remained in the shadows, pulling the strings. He also knew that in order to truly build an empire, he needed allies beyond the criminal world. He cultivated relationships with politicians, business leaders, and even law enforcement officials. He understood that power wasn't just about controlling the streets, it was about controlling the systems that govern them. Bribery, political influence, and strategic partnerships allowed him to expand his reach, ensuring that even if the authorities wanted to bring him down, they faced significant obstacles in doing so. His ability to build an empire was not just about making money, it was about creating an ecosystem where everything operated in his favor. He controlled the flow of money, the movements of his rivals, and the loyalty of those under him. Every decision he made was designed to strengthen his hold on power, ensuring that his empire remained unshakable, no matter the external pressures. By the time he fully took control, his influence stretched far and wide. He wasn't just another crime boss, he was the architect of one of the most disciplined, well-structured criminal organizations in history. And unlike those who built their power on bloodshed alone, he built his on patience, intelligence, and an unbreakable web of connections that end the dangerous world of organized crime. There are two types of leaders: those who believe they are untouchable and act recklessly, and those who understand that the greatest threat is not from within but from law enforcement. The most successful figures in history were not necessarily the most violent or feared, but the ones who mastered the art of avoiding prosecution. The man we are discussing today was one of the best at staying ahead of the law. From the very beginning of his rise, he understood that the biggest mistake most gangsters made was drawing attention to themselves. Many of his contemporaries flaunted their power, living lavish lifestyles, openly engaging in criminal activities, and daring the authorities to challenge them. But he operated differently. He never sought public recognition, never engaged in unnecessary violence, and most importantly, never left behind evidence that could be used against him. His ability to evade law enforcement wasn't just about luck, it was about discipline and strategy. He made sure that his name was never directly linked to any illegal activities. Orders were passed down through multiple layers of trusted intermediaries, ensuring that even if someone was arrested and interrogated, they had nothing concrete to offer against him. If law enforcement managed to take down one of his operations, it was always someone else's name on the paperwork, never his. Another key to his survival was his ability to keep law enforcement divided. He understood that police officers, FBI agents, and government officials were not a single unified force. They were individuals with their own ambitions, weaknesses, and, in some cases, a willingness to look the other way. He built connections with corrupt officials, ensuring that key figures in law enforcement were either on his payroll or, at least, hesitant to pursue him too aggressively. Bribery was not just about money, it was about long-term investment. If a politician or a police chief had taken favors from him in the past, they became assets, either protecting him directly or ensuring that investigations into his activities never gained too much traction. Even when law enforcement did attempt to go after him, they found themselves facing a frustrating reality. He was always a step ahead. His organization had strict protocols in place to detect surveillance, destroy evidence, and mislead investigators. Meetings were carefully planned, communication was done through coded messages, and anyone caught speaking too freely was quickly removed from the equation. He also understood the importance of legal defenses. Unlike many criminals who ignored the legal system, he invested heavily in the best lawyers money could buy. These attorneys weren't just for defense, they were part of his strategy. They helped him structure his business dealings in ways that made it nearly impossible to link his personal wealth to criminal activity. Even when he was brought in for questioning, there was never enough evidence to convict him. One of his greatest strengths was his patience. He never panicked, never made rash decisions, and never allowed himself to be backed into a corner. When law enforcement intensified their efforts, he didn't respond with desperation, he adjusted. He cut ties with anyone who had become a liability, shifted operations to new locations, and even temporarily stepped back from the business when necessary, allowing others to take the heat while he remained in the shadows. Unlike other crime bosses who met their downfall due to a single mistake, an intercepted phone call, a trusted associate turning informant, or a financial trail leading back to them, he made sure that no such weakness existed in his empire. The authorities knew who he was, They knew he was in control, but proving it in court was an entirely different matter. While many gangsters lived fast and died young, he managed to avoid prison for decades, outlasting most of his rivals. His ability to manipulate, mislead, and outthink law enforcement was a key factor in why his power remained unchallenged for so long. In the ruthless world of organized crime, power is never given, it is taken. And once someone reaches the top, they must fight to keep it. Throughout history, many crime bosses have met their downfall not at the hands of law enforcement, but through betrayals, internal power struggles, and ambitious rivals looking to claim the throne. The man we are discussing today understood this reality better than anyone. He knew that eliminating threats wasn't just about violence. It was about strategy, timing, and ensuring that every move benefited his long-term power. From the very beginning of his rise, he studied his enemies closely. He understood that in the criminal underworld, threats didn't always come from the outside. More often than not, the greatest dangers came from within, from ambitious underlings who believed they could do a better job, from partners who became too greedy, and from allies who, under pressure, could turn into enemies. He made sure that these threats were dealt with before they could grow into real problems. One of his key strategies was patience. Unlike other crime bosses who acted impulsively, reacting with immediate violence whenever they felt threatened, he waited. He allowed his rivals to reveal their weaknesses, to expose their ambitions, and to make the first mistake. When he moved against them, it was always at the right moment, when they were vulnerable, isolated, or had lost the support they once enjoyed. Another defining aspect of his approach was subtlety. He didn't believe in unnecessary bloodshed. He understood that high-profile killings, especially of powerful figures, brought unwanted attention from law enforcement and the public. When a rival needed to be eliminated, it was never in a way that pointed directly back to him. Sometimes, enemies simply disappeared, their fates unknown. Other times, they were set up, arrested, or forced into exile. And in some cases, he let them destroy themselves, feeding their egos, pushing them into reckless decisions, and allowing them to make enemies who would take them down for him. But when violence was necessary, he made sure it was decisive. He never acted out of anger or emotion. Every elimination was a calculated move, ensuring that the removal of one person didn't create bigger problems. Unlike other gangsters who made enemies by acting too aggressively, he handled eliminations with precision. When someone was taken out, there was always a reason, always a justification that made it clear to others why it had to happen. One of his most brilliant tactics was using loyalty as both a weapon and a shield. He rewarded those who were loyal, ensuring they remained on his side, but he also tested them constantly. He planted false information to see if it leaked, monitored his associates for signs of discontent, and removed anyone who showed even the slightest hint of betrayal. In his world, trust was never given. It was earned and maintained through unwavering loyalty. His control over his organization was so strong that even those who wanted to betray him found it nearly impossible. He structured his empire in such a way that no single person had all the information, ensuring that even if someone turned informant, they could never bring down the entire operation. And if law enforcement did manage to flip one of his men, that person often didn't survive long enough to testify. He also understood the power of perception. By maintaining an aura of control and inevitability, he discouraged betrayals before they even happened. People feared him not just because of what he had done, but because of what they believed he was capable of doing. His reputation alone was often enough to keep potential rivals in line. This mastery of eliminating threats, combined with his patience, intelligence, and ability to manipulate those around him, ensured that he remained in power for far longer than most crime bosses. While others fell due to betrayals and backstabbing, he continued to strengthen his grip, always staying one step ahead of those who sought to challenge him. And the criminal underworld. Loyalty is everything. Without it, no empire can survive. But at the same time, betrayal is inevitable. Every crime boss, no matter how powerful, must constantly navigate the fine line between trust and treachery. The man at the center of our discussion today understood this better than most. He knew that while loyalty could build an empire, a single act of betrayal could bring it crashing down. From the very start of his rise to power, he was careful about who he trusted. He did not believe in blind loyalty. He believed in tested loyalty. Every person in his inner circle had to prove themselves repeatedly, earning their place through years of unwavering commitment. He surrounded himself only with those he knew would put their lives on the line for him, and even then, he never became complacent. One of his key strategies in ensuring loyalty was reward. He knew that people who felt valued were less likely to betray him. He paid his men well, made sure their families were taken care of, and provided them with opportunities to grow within the organization. Unlike other crime bosses who ruled through pure fear, he ruled through a mix of respect and obligation. His men weren't just following orders. They were following a leader they believed in, someone who had given them power, protection, and prosperity. But at the same time, he understood human nature. No matter how much he rewarded his men, there would always be those who wanted more power, more money, more influence. He knew that greed, jealousy, and fear could turn even the most loyal associate into a traitor. That's why he constantly tested those around him, feeding them false information to see if it leaked, creating situations where they had to prove their loyalty under pressure. If someone failed the test, they didn't get a second chance. He also understood that fear had its place. While he ruled largely through respect, he made sure that everyone knew the consequences of betrayal. Those who turned against him didn't just disappear, they became examples. He didn't just eliminate traitors. He did it in a way that sent a message to others. Betrayal was not just punished, it was made unthinkable. His ability to detect betrayal was almost legendary. He could sense when someone was no longer fully committed, when doubt had crept into their mind. Sometimes, he would give them a chance to correct their path, offering them an opportunity to prove their loyalty again. But if he saw that betrayal was inevitable, he struck first. He never gave traitors time to act. Despite his efforts, he still faced betrayals, because in the end, no crime boss is immune. But when it happened, he handled it with cold precision. He didn't react emotionally, didn't lash out in anger. Instead, he calmly assessed the situation, identified the root cause, and removed the problem without hesitation. At the same time, he used betrayal to his advantage. If a rival's men were unhappy, he found ways to turn them against their leader. If law enforcement was pressuring someone in his organization to become an informant, he would either neutralize the threat or, in some cases, feed them misleading information to misdirect the authorities. He didn't just prevent betrayals, he used them as tools to weaken his enemies. His mastery of loyalty and betrayal was one of the key reasons his power remained intact for so long. While other crime bosses were taken down by their own men, he stayed ahead, always watching, always testing, always ensuring that those closest to him were exactly where they needed to be on his side. Running a criminal empire is no different from running a legitimate business, except that failure often comes with deadly consequences. The most successful crime bosses are not just ruthless enforcers. They are master strategists, disciplined leaders, and sharp businessmen. The man we are discussing today built one of the most stable and long-lasting criminal organizations not through reckless expansion, but through careful control of every aspect of his operations. He understood that power was not just about muscle, it was about money. He didn't just want to be a feared figure in the underworld. He wanted an empire that functioned efficiently, one that generated wealth and influence without drawing unnecessary attention. Unlike some crime lords who focused on quick, high-risk profits, he prioritized steady, long-term income. He ensured that every operation under his control, whether it was gambling, loan sharking, extortion, or other rackets, was run like a well-oiled machine. One of his biggest strengths was discipline. Many crime organizations collapsed because of internal greed, lack of structure, or careless decisions. But he ran his operations with the precision of a corporate CEO. He made sure that money was collected on time, that resources were allocated efficiently, and that every person in his organization understood their role. He didn't tolerate waste, laziness, or reckless behavior. If someone made a mistake, they were either corrected or removed. He also ensured that his business remained diversified. Unlike some gangsters who relied solely on one source of income, such as drug trafficking or bootlegging, he built a portfolio of criminal enterprises. Illegal gambling, loan sharking, construction deals, labor union influence, and smuggling operations all played a role in his empire. This diversification protected him. If one business was shut down or faced increased law enforcement pressure, others continued to bring in revenue. Another major factor in his success was his ability to operate in secrecy. Many criminal enterprises fell apart because they became too visible, too notorious. He ensured that his businesses, while illegal, blended into the fabric of the legitimate economy. He used front companies, laundered money through seemingly respectable businesses, and made sure that his financial records were nearly impossible to trace. Even when law enforcement suspected his involvement, they struggled to find hard evidence. But controlling the business wasn't just about money, it was about people. He knew that an empire was only as strong as those who ran it. He appointed only the most competent and loyal men to oversee different branches of his operations. He ensured that they were well compensated and that they shared in the success of the organization. This prevented internal power struggles, kept morale high, and ensured that everyone had a vested interest in maintaining order and discipline. He also mastered the art of negotiation. Not every problem could be solved with violence. He understood that in the world of organized crime, relationships were just as valuable as firepower. He built strong connections with businessmen, politicians, and law enforcement officials, ensuring that his operations could continue with minimal disruption. When conflicts arose, he preferred to settle them through diplomacy rather than unnecessary bloodshed. He knew that a well-negotiated deal was often more beneficial than a violent confrontation that could draw unwanted attention. His ability to control his business was the key to his long-term success. While others expanded too quickly, became reckless, or lost control of their men, he remained steady. He ruled not through chaos, but through order. Every dollar was accounted for, every operation carefully managed, and every decision made with the future in mind. This discipline allowed him to maintain power for decades, ensuring that his empire remained one of the most stable and profitable criminal organizations of its time. In the world of organized crime, the most dangerous mistake a leader can make is drawing too much attention to themselves. Many crime bosses have fallen not because of their enemies, but because of their own arrogance, flaunting their wealth, seeking public recognition, or allowing their names to become too well known. The man we are discussing today understood that true power was not in being seen, but in being invisible. His ability to maintain a low profile was one of the key reasons he avoided the fate that befell so many others in his position. Unlike other gangsters who craved notoriety, he remained in the shadows. He did not dress in flashy suits, drive extravagant cars, or throw lavish parties that attracted media attention. He lived modestly, at least in appearance, blending into society like an ordinary businessman. While his organization controlled a vast criminal empire, he ensured that his personal lifestyle did not reflect the power he truly held. This strategy was not just about avoiding law enforcement, it was about control. A boss who makes himself the face of an organization becomes a target. He knew that the more visible he was, the more vulnerable he became. By keeping a low profile, he ensured that if law enforcement or rivals wanted to take down the organization, they would struggle to find direct evidence linking him to its activities. He also avoided the mistakes of other crime bosses who sought media attention. Some gangsters enjoyed the spotlight, granting interviews, flaunting their wealth, and acting as if they were celebrities. He did the opposite. He avoided cameras, never gave public statements, and ensured that even his name was rarely mentioned in criminal investigations. His power did not come from public fear. It came from the quiet knowledge that he was in control, even if few people ever saw him in action. His meetings were always conducted in private, never in high-profile restaurants or places that could attract unwanted attention. He used intermediaries to pass messages, ensuring that even those within his own organization had limited direct contact with him. This made it incredibly difficult for law enforcement to build a case against him. While they might suspect he was the mastermind, they struggled to prove it because there were almost no recorded conversations, no financial transactions in his name, and no public presence to link him directly to criminal activity. Another key part of his low-profile strategy was his ability to blend into legitimate business circles. He ensured that a portion of his wealth was invested in legal enterprises, construction companies, real estate, and unions. This allowed him to appear as a respectable businessman, making it even harder for authorities to paint him as a criminal. When questioned, he always had an explanation for his wealth, and unlike many gangsters who flaunted their illegal earnings, his financial records were carefully structured to avoid suspicion. Even within his own organization, he maintained a degree of mystery. While his closest associates knew he was in charge, many lower-ranking members never even met him in person. Orders were passed down through trusted lieutenants, creating layers of separation that made it nearly impossible to connect him directly to any illegal activities. This system ensured that if law enforcement managed to turn someone into an informant, that person would have little to no direct knowledge of his operations. His ability to maintain a low profile was not just a survival tactic, it was a masterclass in discipline. While others sought recognition, he understood that the greatest power came from working in the background, where no one could see him coming. It was this ability to operate in the shadows, to remain unseen while controlling everything, that made him one of the most successful and elusive crime figures of his time. In the world of organized crime, power is often fleeting. Many crime bosses rise to the top only to fall just as quickly, taken down by rivals, betrayed by their own men, or brought to justice by law enforcement. But true power is measured not just by how long someone rules, but by the legacy they leave behind. The man we are discussing today didn't just build an empire, he built a system that endured, influencing the criminal underworld long after he was gone. One of the key reasons his legacy remained strong was the way he structured his organization. He didn't rule through brute force alone. He created a hierarchy, a system that ensured stability even in his absence. Unlike some crime lords who ran their empires like personal kingdoms, where everything depended on their individual decisions, he built an organization that could function without him. His leadership was strong, but it was also strategic. He empowered trusted men to run different aspects of the operation, ensuring that no single loss could bring everything crashing down. His ability to maintain discipline within his organization was another major factor in his lasting influence. Many crime families crumbled due to internal disputes, reckless behavior, or a lack of structure. But he ran his empire like a business, ensuring that rules were followed, conflicts were handled discreetly, and everyone understood their roles. This prevented the kind of internal chaos that had destroyed so many other criminal organizations. Another reason his legacy endured was his deep understanding of relationships. He didn't just rely on his own strength. He built alliances that ensured his influence extended far beyond his immediate circle. He maintained close ties with other criminal families, legitimate businessmen, and even corrupt officials, creating a network of power that continued to function even after his direct involvement diminished. He was not just a boss, he was a strategist who ensured that his influence reached into every corner of the system. His ability to avoid law enforcement also played a role in securing his legacy. Unlike other crime bosses who spent their final years in prison, he managed to outmaneuver authorities at every turn. He avoided the kind of reckless behavior that drew attention, made sure there was never enough evidence to convict him, and operated in the shadows with a level of discipline that few could match. This meant that, while many of his contemporaries were taken down, he remained a figure of power and mystery, further cementing his status as one of the most successful figures in organized crime. Even after his time, his influence could still be felt. The methods he perfected, maintaining secrecy, structuring a disciplined organization, controlling multiple revenue streams, and managing law enforcement pressure, became a blueprint for future crime bosses. His successors didn't just inherit an empire, they inherited a philosophy of power, one that had proven to be more effective and more enduring than most. His legacy wasn't just in the wealth he accumulated or the power he held. It was in the way he changed the game. While many crime bosses came and went, remembered only for their violent ends, he left behind something greater. His name became synonymous with calculated control, disciplined leadership, and an ability to rule without unnecessary chaos. Even those who followed in his footsteps understood that they were working within a system he had created, a system that, in many ways, continued to operate long after he was gone.